Welcome to the Jack Westin MCAT podcast with your host, Phil Hawkins.
And Azaii Calderon Muñiz. Welcome to a very special podcast episode. Phil and I are super excited because if you heard the announcement last week, you know that there is a new resource at Jack Westin, and it is specifically a live online version of the course. And we're particularly excited because aside from, in general, having access to some of our best instructors, this means that for folks that join the live online course, you'll have access to us.
Yeah.
A lot more access. And we love being able to interact with you guys. We absolutely love having the opportunity to help you on your MCAT journey. And this is something that we are so excited for. Ultimately, this is going to be building off of the complete course that already exists. And it's an opportunity to have more time with instructors, and not just ourselves. There will be other versions with other really amazing instructors. But this is going to be an opportunity to discuss content and content connections and strategy, not just for cars, but also for the sciences, and really dive into high yield and also complex topics in a way that is going to be optimized to help you learn. And so we're super excited about this. It's another great opportunity to help y'all on your journey.
Yeah, there's a bunch of really cool things in this, just kind of overall. One part of that is kind of in a way, just because I feel some people being like, oh, I don't know if I need this or that sort of thing. But I do want to kind of take a second, like, depending on kind of how you look at it, like, if you go fast, this is kind of almost free, what we're doing. And this is something that a lot of you guys who listen to the podcast know that we love talking to students. We love working with students. And like, this is why we do what we do, even though I know Azaii, like in med school, you're like, I'm like, I don't know how much free time I have, but I really enjoy working with students. And so this was something that we're really excited about because it means we get more kind of like FaceTime with students. We get to kind of like help them, especially make that kind of like last push towards test day. There is a lot of, I feel like, gaps in the peek behind the curtain in like the MCAT prep, like, industry and kind of what's going on. I feel like a lot of times, like, test prep companies are really good at kind of like just giving you like the content and the basic stuff, but then not helping you make the connections between the different pieces and like getting real deep into like, how do the AAMC writers think? Like, how are they building these questions? How are they setting up traps? And so I feel like half of what I do with students when we get like, closer to test day is like, it's not so much like, like you got to get the content down, but a lot of times students can figure out ways to cram content and get information into their head. But like, you need that kind of like last push to be able to make the fine-tuned connections between the different topics. And that's something that you kind of need to talk to somebody who really has a lot of insight in, like the AAMC and the exams and things like that. And so that's why we're super excited about it.
Yeah, and I know we've definitely said this on the podcast in the past, but it's not just content. It is connections. The AAMC tests relationships, and that is centered. This is a central component of this version of the course, and also the original version of the course as well. It's just another opportunity to look at it differently. And I think that's something that's incredibly important. And I know that our content team has worked really hard on this, and also sprinkling in some things that you might see in your medical career as well, which is really fun.
Yeah. And it makes it more interesting. It makes it more motivating. And I think that that's always a big thing. We should probably start with just, who is this for? Because I think that's the thing that, like, we want to be crystal clear. They're like, who do we think this is going to help? Who do we think maybe this wouldn't help? And because I don't want to like make people like, I don't want to like bait and switch, right? I don't want to trick people into like, oh, just do this thing and you're good and like pay money or whatever. No, like, I want to make sure that this is actually going to be a good use of your time. This is going to be something that's going to actively increase your score, because if it's not, then you shouldn't do it. You should be doing something else. So generally this course is for those people who are making those connections between like those different pieces. The live portion of our course with where we're meeting like twice a week and kind of going through this, that is something that when you get to that portion of the course, that's for people who actually already have a pretty good background on the MCAT. They have a pretty good, kind of like foundation, and their fundamentals are solid. And so we want you to kind of like be taking this course, like the first class, probably like 3 months before your actual start date, or your actual test date. Sorry. So you want this class to start about 3 months before your first exam, your actual exam. I need to be very clear with my words here. So about 3 months, that could be like somewhere between 10 and 15 weeks from the start of our class, which is going to be in January, the beginning of January, and then your actual exam, like that you have hopefully registered for at this point. Now, because you need a good background, if you've prepped from another company, or if you've prepped on your own, you've self-studied or done something, this can be a really useful thing for you. But if you're coming in and you're like, I haven't like really started my prep, and I don't know if I want to jump into something that's going to assume a bunch of fundamentals, what we're going to do is give you access to our course, like our actual, starting from scratch course that, we helped build, and like I built like the entire science portion of that. And so if you want to take this course that starts in January and you jump in there now, like you can spend a couple of months working on those fundamentals, and we'll create study schedules for you. You can go to office hours with me. You can go and kind of like get that fundamental background that you may need before the live portion where we're meeting twice a week on scheduled times, before that actually starts in January. I know there's a lot of students right now that are, kind of ramping up for finals and things like that. And they're trying to figure out like, how am I going to spend my Christmas break? And so I think that there is a way for students who are just starting out, and don't have any of those fundamentals. We want to make this something useful for you. And so we will give you our course, our course that is like asynchronous, around your own schedule, to help you build up those fundamentals before you actually start the live portion of the class, where we're doing kind of the deeper dive sorts of things.
Yeah. And I know that you mentioned, and I want to make sure that we're clear about this. You mentioned that if folks go fast, it's almost like it's free. That would be this portion, right? So this is still a paid course, but because it's November, Jack Westin has decided to decrease the cost of this particular version of the course, along with others. And so that's something that you would want to take advantage of, not just because of that, but because you would have additional time with the asynchronous version or the self-paced version of the course. And so part of why we have it set up that you can access that course right now if you sign up is exactly because of what you're talking about, Phil. It's really helpful to come in, make sure that you're prepared before that first session, and thinking about who's really going to benefit from this. So we did kind of a dry run and found that the students that benefited the most were the students that were scoring below a 510, because this means that, and regardless of where you are on that spectrum, so if you are under 500, you will probably see the most benefit, because this is going to cover not just content, but also strategy and connections. And so we're here to support you in that last push with the live sessions that we're going to be doing are really that almost boot camp approach, and making sure that you have all of the tools that you need as you build up your MCAT prep.
Yeah. So just to be clear on kind of the price. So because there is a cost to this, and like I said, I want to be kind of clear. So the live course is going to cost $14.50, which is already the cheapest live course from any of the major prep companies. But if you buy this live course, we're going to give you the foundation fundamental MCAT course, the MCAT complete course that we have. And that costs $14.50. And so that's you're getting, if you want to buy the complete course, you should buy this, because then you get extra stuff on top of it. You get extra questions, extra boot camp things that we're doing. We're going to talk more about different stuff. There's some really cool things in there, the daily data crunches and the flashcard decks, and things that get kind of added kind of on top of this, like the complete course and the live stuff. And so there's a lot of things that kind of get connected to this and kind of things that I think will be beneficial to students. But you get kind of like the complete course, which is $1,450, and all of this other stuff, which, like, if you were going to buy the complete course, that would also just be $1,450. And so in a way, this additional live classes where you can meet with us for, hours and hours every week, is something that is going to essentially be free if you were going to buy that anyway.
Yeah. And so the folks that are going to benefit the most from this first cohort are going to be our March test takers. So if you're planning on testing in January and you are not seeing the results that you want, you might want to consider pushing your test date. And if you were to push your test date, then this would be a good fit. But if you're testing in January, this is not going to be helpful because it's going to end after your test date. So it's going to begin the first Tuesday of January. We're starting off the year with the live version of the sessions. But of course, you would have access to the complete online MCAT course, the self-paced version right away. And it's going to be on a Tuesday, Thursday schedule. And we want to be clear about the time because the, folks in Pacific are going to have a different time than folks on the Eastern time zone. And so this is going to happen from 3:30 to 6:30 Pacific, making sure that, because I know there was some confusion. It originally sent it out in saying 6:30 to 9:30 Pacific, but that would have been super late Eastern. So we just want to clarify.
Yeah, 6:30 to 9:30 East Coast.
Exactly.
That would be
3:30.
Oh my God. 5:30 Central, 4:30 Mountain, and 3:30 in Pacific. And if you're somewhere outside of that, then you need to do your own math because we are struggling with just sticking to the continental US.
And so like we mentioned, you would have access right away to the asynchronous complete course. Note that still includes access to the current limited live office hours and workshops. You would still have access to that when you sign up and have access to the asynchronous course. This is separate targeted material and separate targeted sessions. But this is, if you're testing in March, this is the cohort you want to be thinking about.
I do want to reiterate, even if you feel like you don't need that like asynchronous course, and you like, that's fine. Like if you are retaking or something and you've got like a pretty good fundamental background, or let's say you are taking the test in January, you decide to push back because it's just like the connections aren't there. In that case, like, the live course is going to be perfect for you. But even then, like, because we let you into the asynchronous course, you can come to office hours with me. You can kind of like come and kind of like, get to know us a little bit better. And the better we know our students, the more we can help. And that's something that is, I think, actually pretty important. I think a lot of students just kind of, different people have different problems. And I want to make sure, like, as time goes by, I get to know a lot of the students in our courses. And like, someone will ask me a question like, oh, I know you well enough to say that your problems are not content issues. So like the questions you're asking are so in depth that everything you need to know. And you're starting to like work on like the cusp of the edge of like the MCAT's never going to ask you that. And so when I start to get those in like that student, I need to kind of like redirect them and like more like data interpretation, application, like, some of those softer skills, endurance, those things are like a better way to improve their scores. But sometimes if students like are struggling on the content, that becomes a little bit more apparent. Like, okay, for you, like maybe this resource is going to be more useful for you because I know that like you're struggling a little bit with like anatomy and physiology, for example. And so the more we get to know you, the more we can help. And so even though our first class is not until January 2nd, you can still like get into the asynchronous course and still start meeting up with us, still ask questions. Like everyone has questions when they're studying for the MCAT of like, wait, what's going on with this thing? And so you can always come to office hours and ask those questions and get a little bit more feedback, which I think can be useful for students. We will probably be adding more courses after this like January 2nd course. We're going to expect to have more, like maybe another one in January, maybe some in, for some of the other ones. I will say, if you are at all curious about that, you can reach out to one of our academic advisors, and I'm sure that they will make sure that, like, if you're like, hey, is there one in April? Because I'd really like to do that. Like, they will make sure that you were kind of like passing that information along, and we will kind of readjust as needed to make sure, because we're here for you guys. And so we want to make sure that we are there for you. And I understand a lot of students might be like, oh, I'm taking a test in June. Maybe this doesn't make sense to take the January one because there's so much time between the end of the course and my actual test date. I will say we're going to have a lot of room, or you're going to need a lot of room in your schedule for this. So even though it's like Tuesday, Thursday, like this is not something that you work on 2 evenings a week and then you're done. There's going to be a fair amount of like structural stuff built into this. So you're going to have kind of like homework before you kind of like come to that live class, kind of getting in that content of like whatever the topics are going to be about, so that you can start to apply this at like a higher level. And so it will be like, expect to have like a fair amount of homework. We're also going to be taking practice tests during this time. And so that's something that we're going to kind of build into kind of like the plan, is like taking practice tests, like making those pushes to get better as we get closer to test day. And so I would say at least 25 or 30 hours a week is what you're going to be able to need to commit. You want to probably approach this as like a full-time job on top of your calendar. And I know that that's hard because real life is hard. And MCAT students generally are not the ones that are, avoiding extra interesting extracurriculars and things like that. Generally, pre-med students tend to be already kind of crunched for time. But if you want to really get the most out of it, it's going to require some kind of like input of time and homework and things like that we're going to be kind of like assigning and talking about in the actual sessions.
And one of the ways to buffer this is to really take advantage of the prep that we are giving you ahead of time. So you will see the prep that applies to each session before the sessions start. And I think that's so powerful, because then it gives you time to actually learn the content and the material from the science perspective and build on it. Because at the end of the day, all of the science that you're learning builds on one another, and you're applying those relationships to the daily questions that you're doing. And for cars, it becomes so much more important. So if you sign up for the course, you should be starting on cars right away and learning some of those strategies, because you don't want to reinforce bad strategies. And you don't want to get to a point where you're 2 months out from test day and having to relearn all of the strategies. And so making sure that you start that prep as soon as you get into the asynchronous and the complete self-paced course is going to buffer some of that time that you're going to need later on. You're also going to be in a much better place to follow along during the sessions, because there's a lot of information in these sessions. They're high yield. They're covering complex topics. They're looking at relationships. And so you want to give yourself the absolute best possibility of getting the most out of these sessions. Can't emphasize enough that cars, you should be starting as soon as you get access to the live course. So it's a way, again, to just mitigate some of that, get the most out of this.
That breaking of bad habits is always something that I struggle with. And so whenever I'm working with a student and they're just kind of starting and they're like, should I just be doing a bunch of cars to start with them? Like, I don't want you to do any cars until I talk to you. And like, because what's going to happen is you're going to develop some habits, and like, I want you to do this a really specific way. And like, you kind of want to start doing that like the right way. Otherwise that habit is going to be harder to break. But you're right. We do give you, I felt like I was scaring people with like, oh, there's just so much stuff kind of going on. But if the live course doesn't start till January 2nd, you could use a lot of your winter break to kind of do that prep run up to this. And so by the time January even hits, like, you're already like weeks ahead in that kind of like preview prep that you need to do for those sessions. And so there are ways to kind of like make that work. But I do just want to be really clear that if you're somebody who like, I have 5 hours a week, like there maybe is something else that we need to do and kind of like make this work, because as you guys know, it like the MCAT is a monster of a test. And so in order to make these live sessions as useful as possible, we're going to go pretty quick, which is why we want to make sure that like students have a pretty decent foundation and background. And we're going to give you some stuff to kind of like help you get that foundation if you need it. But I just want to be really clear on this, because I want students to go into this knowing that this is going to be a fast pace. We're shooting for big score increases quickly.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, we're going to have to push really hard. And I say that like, that's one thing, like, you know, if pre-med students tend to have busy schedules, they also tend to not shy away from hard things. Because if you don't want to do a hard path, right? Like if that's the most important thing to you, then you would not be going into medicine.
Yeah.
But because it's definitely a trickier path, I think, as we both can attest to. But I think that there's a lot of value that comes from that and being able to push yourself. I know specifically when I went to med school, the first 6 months, I felt like I learned more in that 6 months than I did in a couple of years in undergrad. And it was just like, I didn't realize I could learn so much so quickly. And I think we're going to try to mimic that a little bit with this course, where I think you'll be surprised how much stuff you're putting into your head over the course of a week. But it's going to be intense.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this and realizing, okay, maybe this might not be the best fit for me, you can still purchase the complete asynchronous or self-paced online course separately. So
Yes.
These two things are not mandatory to get together. And actually, that's also on sale during this month, which I think is really cool. This is the 1 month a year that we do this. But I think I want to take a moment, step back, and think about what makes these sessions different from the live sessions that are currently offered in the asynchronous course. So for those, there are really 2 buckets. The first is, and this is the current on live course, the first is workshops, and you break down a passage. The second is office hours. You come in, generally ask questions. For CARs, they're pre-submitted for the sciences as well. But in these sessions, which are going to be once the live course starts, 2 classes per week, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and 3 hours each with about 2.5 hours of teaching time, it's going to be actually breaking down content and immediately applying it, immediately looking at the strategies. And so it's a hybrid, essentially. And I think that's part of what makes it really powerful. There's also something called micro learning thrown in there. And so really making sure that we're getting bits and pieces and looking at the topics that are connected, even if they're not the same ones. So what do amino acids, what are some of the things amino acids connect with in terms of topic? What are some of the things that are related to enzymes that are not just enzymes? And so that's really powerful, because that's what you're going to get on a practice passage. You're going to see enzymes, you're going to see energy, you're going to see data analysis and interpretation all in one passage. And that's what these live sessions in the live online version of the course are really going to emphasize. And so you'd have 7 of the science sessions, 4 CAR-specific sessions, and then we would do one together, which I'm really excited for, Phil, just because we already get to spend time together, and we've been working together for so many years.
Longer than I would like to admit. Not that I don't like working with you, but it makes me feel old. Yeah.
But yeah, so those are some of the things that you can expect to see. And again, you would still have access to office hours, the regular workshops for additional support. But again, you're really going to get the most use out of those before our live sessions start.
Yeah. The live sessions also come with some like extra stuff. It's not just the live session side of things. This is actually something that, like, to be honest, these are really cool just anyway, and like are kind of worth using on top of that. We're going to give you a lot of notes to go with all the sessions, which like is really useful to be able to kind of like allow you to move a little bit quicker. but also a lot of social support, I think, is always important. So we have a Discord that we are going to be using, and we'll give you a peek behind the curtain. We've been kind of working on this for a little while, and so we've done a couple of kind of like beta testing that we've been kind of doing a little bit behind the scenes. In case some of you guys are like, where's Phil been? Like, just like on the website or Azaii or things like that. Like, what's going on with this? We have been doing some interesting kind of like beta tests, and we have found that students love the Discord, where they are kind of like interacting with each other. They are creating study groups. They are, like finding people who like, a student will be like, I'm really struggling with this thing. Another student will be like, oh, I found this really useful resource to work on that. And that's really important for just like the usefulness of it and being able to kind of like crowdsource learning, which is useful, and like resources and things like that. But it also really helps with motivation. And it also really helps to not feel like you're alone. Because I think a lot of people understand, especially after the last, after COVID, I feel like the current pre-med students actually understand this pretty well, that like isolation can impede learning. And like, if we're kind of like coming together in like groups, all of a sudden, like it makes it more motivating and easier to kind of push and kind of get that growth overall. So those are just some of the things. I know there's a couple of Azaii that like you were particularly excited about, so I don't want to spoil all of them.
Yeah, and I just want to add reminders in the channel. I think that's super helpful as someone who always has something going on. A little nudge, a little reminder is very much appreciated. And so this is an additional benefit that you can have. We also have daily data crunches, and I got to take a peek. So this is from the science side of things, but I thought it was so incredible because it shows you how to break down figures and how to do data interpretation, and really takes you through that process, which is, I haven't seen that very well and on a regular basis elsewhere. And so that's something that, we've talked a lot of times when we're talking about reviewing passages, Phil, we've definitely brought up, okay, sometimes it's content, sometimes it's relationships, sometimes it's math mistakes, and sometimes it's the data interpretation. There are questions that you can miss if you don't know how to break down a figure or don't interpret the information in the figure correctly. And so this is another really great add-on resource that I don't think the value of that can be overstated, because there's so much.
Yeah, pretty much every student I run into struggles with like data interpretation and analytic techniques and things like that. Unless you're like, you like just finished your post-bac biochem PhD or whatever. Like unless you've been doing it for like 5 years of data interpretation, then you're probably going to need some help with that data interpretation side of things. I know. So there's like, I'm going to give you like a peek. I'm going to shout out Anastasia. I know that she is honestly going to be like, wait, like, don't mention me. She likes to hide in the background. And so I kind of feel a little bit guilty, but she deserves a shout out. She is someone who also has been to medical school, and she has like the stuff that she's done with like building the data sets and these like daily data crunches is like, honestly, I told Azaii earlier that I think she's one of the best things that has happened to Jack Westin, like behind the scenes in years, because she has just been able to bring this like really high level of like helping students break down data and make those connections. So I know that I don't know if she listens to the podcast because she's got a lot of work to do. But in case anybody ever runs into Anastasia, tell her that she is the best, because
she truly is. And her entire content team, they have worked so hard to make sure that all the new stuff they're creating also integrates with the asynchronous version of the course. And so, yes, Anastasia, you are amazing if you happen to hear this.
Yeah. And so she has also been kind of like incorporating AAMC stuff into this, but we also have like flashcard decks that we're kind of building into the course as well. So there's going to be assigned flashcard decks to help like make sure that you're getting the highest yield stuff. There's going to be, like we said, prep work. And so there's going to be some prep work that's going to be kind of assigned going in here. So there's a lot of stuff that's just kind of on top of like stuff that like essentially none of those things that we just talked about existed 2 months ago. Like these are new things. And like a lot of these are like, honestly, like a lot of these are things that like this should be an announcement in and of itself because this is a really useful thing, but we're kind of smashing it all together into one mega thing. And if you were going to buy the asynchronous course, then get this instead, and it's going to all be free on top of that, instead of the cost of the asynchronous course. But yeah, so there's a lot of stuff in there. There is that, like we mentioned, I would say expect about 6 to 10 hours of prep work for each of the science sessions. And as I mentioned, there's going to be more science session than cars. There's going to be 11 science sessions, 4 cars, and then 1 combo session where we're talking about kind of everything kind of in one big piece. But there's also the exam side of things, and I'll let you. I'm getting excited. There's so much stuff.
So part of the reason that it's so helpful to get access to the asynchronous or self-paced course early is so that you can prepare ahead of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you can build that base, because since we want you to be testing, essentially a month-ish out from the end of the course, you're going to be doing practice tests during the actual course. So this is going to be important because you want to make sure that you're ready to take those practice exams. And so that means that you are going to have practice exams on Saturdays, and you have to have the space in your schedule for that. So that means that there's prep for the science courses. There's also prep for the car sessions. There's also homework, even when we're not meeting, because cars, you've got to practice the skill on a regular basis. So that time that Phil mentioned doesn't include the time to take the exams or to review them. And so you need to make sure that you are ready and have time to review exams, because that's going to help you figure out, okay, what do I really need to focus on, right? What content am I weak versus where are the areas where I'm still not making connections, right? Uh-huh. What kinds of questions might I need to ask? And so this is going to be important for getting the most out of the sessions, the live sessions. And you want to make sure that you're prepared for that and that you have that time. And here's the reality. If you're testing in March, you should have been doing
you should be doing
exams anyway.
Yeah.
Right. So you're going to have to do them on your own anyway, but you want to make sure that you're building that time into and mentally putting that time into how long you will need or how much time per week you'll need for this course.
Yeah. I do want to say, like, you don't have to take the test on Saturday. You do have to take a test a week. And like, that's something, like, as I said, it doesn't matter going into, like, whether you're in this course or not, that's what you should be doing. Like, you should be doing about an exam a week. So if you're taking the test in March, you should be doing that anyway. But like adding on like this, like the live classes and kind of like breaking these things down, you also, because you have access to the asynchronous course, you can also go to office hours and straight up just bring questions. Like if you came across something in an exam, like you can go to my office hours and ask me about it. And like, that's actually like, I really struggle with this passage. How do I deal with that? And so those are things that you're going to be able to do as well. And so the live course sessions are not going to be focused on the exams per se. They're going to be focused on like data interpretation and making all those connections, but you still have some support for those exams that you're doing because you'll have access to all the office hours and workshops. And so that's something that I think you should keep in mind as well. There's also like some score tracking stuff, allowing students to like take this data from your exams on the AMC and use that to diagnose your weaknesses. And so super excited about that. You guys know that we are both very data-driven people. I like numbers and kind of like putting those connections. It's weird because I feel like Anastasia likes numbers somehow even more than we do. And so she put a lot of work into that to like make sure that we can kind of like get really great diagnostics and kind of like help students find what's the area where they need to spend a little bit of time to get big increases in their scores. And so that data analysis, not just like working on your data analysis skills, but we will help you analyze your own data as well. And that's something that is invaluable.
Yeah. And we both really love our data. That's something that with cars, you cannot overestimate the value of that, because cars is one. Yeah, exactly. Cars is all about metacognition, thinking about how we think. And so we need to figure out where things are going wrong, and we have to analyze how we're thinking, because there's no content to fall back on.
Yeah.
So where are our strategy gaps, right? Where do we need to target our practice? And so one of the things that I really think will be powerful is being able to, in addition to the live sessions, target your review. When you identify and have the data to figure out, okay, what are my actual weak areas? And I know we've talked about this. Just because you don't feel good about a topic doesn't mean you're actually bad with that topic.
Yeah.
Right? Phil, I know you and kidneys do not get along.
I don't trust feelings, right? There's so many times a student says, like, I feel like I'm bad at physics. And I'm like, let's look at your scores. I'm like, you missed one physics question and you missed 13 biochem ones. You are okay. You are great at physics. You need work on biochem. And so that's why it's really important to do that kind of data analysis side of things, especially like you mentioned cars, because it's all meta, right? There's no content. And so I think like that's something also that I run into a lot when students are analyzing their data. They're just focusing on the area, like the content area. And like, but you need to be clear, like if I miss this question, did I miss this electrostatics question because I don't know electrostatics, or did I miss it because of a math error, which is studying electrostatics is not going to help? Or is it a problem with data interpretation or like graph analysis or fatigue? And like all of those are separate problems that all have separate fixes. And that's why this like being able to like break down your data is really critical. Because like if you are doing a cars passage about a Peruvian ballet dancer and you miss like 3 questions out of 5 in that passage, that doesn't mean you need to go study Peruvian ballet dancers. Well, you need to figure out like how was I thinking and how should I have thought about this? And like that's a very different thing. You can kind of do the same thing in the sciences, right? Like what was I thinking? What should I have thought? Sometimes I didn't know what insulin was. You missed the question because of it. Sometimes like I didn't understand this graph about insulin. I don't need to study insulin. I need to figure out how to break this down. But
please make sure you know what insulin is.
yes. Know what insulin is.
Very important.
Honestly, that's something that just for humans, you should know what insulin is.
Yes.
not even pre-med only.
Your future patients, the MCAT, in general, life. Yes. All important. There's one other, I think, really powerful tool that was created, and again, shout out to Anastasia, to help navigate the course in a way that makes it more searchable for what you were going to be preparing for in the live sessions. And so there's essentially this PDF table of contents in the sense that it will tell you what exact videos you need to watch. It also tells you how long those videos are, which I think is really great, having that in a single PDF, because then you know when you can squeeze them in. And so you can, basically it's a way to bridge the prep that you need to do and having that all in one place with being able to directly figure out where that is in the course. Because again, we're doing a lot of integration in this, and I think that's incredibly important. And I don't know, I'm really excited in case that hasn't come through.
That's something that honestly is useful for anybody and who has like done some prep but needs some extra help. Because in like the complete course, like we have like 100 hours of video on just content, not passage walkthroughs and like things like that. You add that in, it's like hundreds and hundreds of more hours. But like if you're looking, I'm really confused specifically on like Freud's id, ego, and superego. Like having that table of contents helps you find like these are the video is right here and it's 30 minutes long or 32 minutes long, this area that I need to pay attention to. And so being able to find those, diagnose your weak areas, and then figure out how to tackle those, like that's the other side of this. Just diagnosing is not useful. Treating makes it more useful. Diagnose and treat. Those two things go together. If you only do one of them, it doesn't matter if you're doing the other. Or it doesn't matter if you might as well do neither. If you just diagnose and then don't treat, or you treat but don't figure out what the problem is, you got problems. But this is something we're really excited for. I feel like this helping students bridge that last like couple of months to their test date of like, how do I approach things, like putting the passages together, putting the content together, applying it to the test day. How do I get inside the heads of the AAMC test writers? Like those are all things that a lot of times students can get the content down, but then like just getting content down does not mean you're going to get a 525. If you knew everything on the MCAT, like there are students who know that and who like are really good at like bringing in data, but still are struggling with their scores. And so this is designed to kind of like help that push to like make those last, score improvements and putting those last few pieces together. Because often there's I like to talk about this, but like often the AMC will ask a question and there's like 4 or 5 things you need to know or be able to put together to answer that question. And if you don't know any of them, you miss the question. If you know 4 of those 5 things, you also miss the question. And so a lot of times students put in a lot of work, but don't see the score increases in that last like couple of months because they're missing like one small piece of this. And so being able to like say like, okay, to answer this, I need to know about neurons and membranes and capacitors. I need to be able to do data interpretation. And I also need to understand size exclusion chromatography. I don't understand that. I missed the question. And so I think a lot of times students feel this thing where they're like putting in a lot of work, but they don't see their score increase. Like it doesn't mean you're not improving. Like if you knew none of those 5 things, you study for 2 months, now you know 4 of those 5 things, you're still going to miss the question, but you did improve tremendously. Like you got 80% of the way there from where you were at the beginning. And so sometimes it just takes a little bit for students to like put those last little pieces and connections in there, which is something I'm super passionate about because it's super interesting. Like when you can get to a point where it's like, listen, I'm going to talk for 2 hours and there's a chance that this will increase your score by 3 or 4 points, just like this 2-hour session. And that feels really good to be able to help students, like kind of guide them a little bit and like, what's the thing I need to do at this point, that's most going to impact.
Yeah. And the 3-hour sessions will have breaks.
Yes, I will mention there will be breaks in there. I generally find like 2 hours is like the limit. After 2 hours, nobody's learning anything unless you like work in breaks and kind of things. And we will be covering content and passages and like connecting things. And so the sessions are going to be kind of, I want to say like eclectic. Interactive is a much better word. I'm like, I don't really want to say eclectic, but like it should help you stay engaged because we're not going to be like, okay, we're all going to sit for 3 hours and read passages. No, it's like very interactive and it will keep you engaged because we're just kind of like helping kind of make all those last minute connections, which means we're going to be connecting things kind of all over the place. And so I tend to find that's really easy to keep students engaged and motivated and excited, and also just a better way to learn anyway, if you're keeping students engaged. I'm getting into meta education theory at this point, but it's just something I'm passionate about. But yeah.
I want to end us on 2 quotes that if you've been listening for basically any amount of time, you have heard. The first is that it's about progression and not perfection. We do not expect you to come in perfect on anything.
No.
We're here to support your progression. And the second is that a weakness is just a strength you haven't cultivated yet. And we're here to help you figure out how to do that. And that, I think, is important to keep in mind, not just for the MCAT, but your future career as lifelong learners in medicine, as future doctors. Don't lose that perspective because that's how we stay sane in medicine. And if you've been listening and you're thinking, okay, this could be something that I'm interested in, then just set up a meeting with an academic advisor. Meeting with an academic advisor is free. They can help you figure out how to, which cohort might be most helpful for you, getting you access right away, and making sure that this is financially feasible for you. And so if you're thinking about it, this is definitely the month to do that, and just chat with them. They are there to listen to you and figure out what you need as an individual. whether it's this, whether it's other resources, but really that's why they're there. And we believe in investing in you guys. And at the end of the day, that's why we do all of this and try so hard to find a balance between all the free resources that we have, these other resources that we put a lot of effort as well into, just to make sure that we're supporting all of you, and that if you want to be a doctor, you get to become a doctor.
Yeah, I also want to reiterate one last time that like the price is going to be different in November than it is next month. So if you are interested in this and you know that you're interested in, talk to an academic advisor. If you're like, oh, I'm interested in this, but I don't know if I'll be able to pay for it until December or something, talk to an academic advisor. I don't want students to be punished because of like finances, like that sort of thing. I've been a poor, broke college student before. Sometimes I still have that mindset and I'm like, wait, no, that's not me. I don't have to go to meetings because there's free pizza. That I could just buy a pizza, which is a mind shift, effect there. But I do want to, thank everyone for coming. I really like what you were saying, like, the two kind of quotes, a weakness is just a strength you haven't cultivated, and progression, not perfection. That you're absolutely right. The progression, not perfection thing is something big. And I just generally, I really want students to know that like later on, you're going to get into med school and you're going to be like, med school is going to be really overwhelming. And then later on, you're going to be in residency and you're going to like look back at the MCAT and you're going to say, that's not that bad. What was I complaining about? And it's not that I'm saying the MCAT's easy, but you get better.
Yeah.
And so because your skills and your ability to kind of like learn at large volumes, as you get better at those, like looking back, like that thing was not so bad now compared to what I'm doing now. It was a very difficult thing, but my skills are so much higher. And that's a big thing we want to focus on in this course, is like enable students to like have that growth, so that like we're never going to make, like, the MCAT's not easy, but we will be able to like help you like raise your skills to the point where it's, okay, this isn't so bad anymore because I'm better at it. Not that it got easy, but I'm better at it. Yeah, so we definitely want to do that. Talk to an academic advisor. I will say, if you heard about this in the podcast, mention the podcast, just because I think a lot of times, like, the academic advisors, it's just good to kind of like make sure that like people are listening to the podcast and aware of it. And so I want to make sure that you guys are being heard as part of the podcast audience.
Yeah. That helps us keep being able to do this podcast. And so your support makes this possible.